Today is Friday, March 28th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Bill Gates says AI will eventually replace most human tasks. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Joining me today to get through all the news going on today, this week, and coming up, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trey Goins-Phillips. On the focus story, Billy, an outspoken mom's fighting back against a Florida school district. This is after some craziness with her daughter and gender confusion.
Yeah, January Littlejohn, she's become a major advocate. We spoke with her. We're going to hear her story. Lots to unpack there.
All right, looking forward to the details there. And on the main thing, Trey, you caught up with Raj Nair of CBN talking about anti-Semitism rising, not just from what we're used to seeing, these Palestinian Hamas activists on the left, but from the right as well.
Yeah, there's been upticks on both the right and the left, but they all have one common root cause, so we talked about that as well.
All right, looking forward to that conversation coming up on the main thing. All right, the news in 90s coming up next, right after this.
Let me tell you, the God's gonna cut you.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem, and the city is restless. The people of Israel welcome Jesus as king, his followers ready for revolution. But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! How will you escape being condemned to hell?
Experience Holy Week like never before.
What have you done?
Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen, Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
And Bill Gates says artificial intelligence will soon outperform humans in fields like medicine and education, and it could happen, he says, in less than 10 years. In a recent appearance on The Tonight Show, Gates said that AI will make, quote, great medical advice and, quote, great tutoring free and widely available, potentially replacing the need for doctors and teachers in many cases. He also warned that this shift is happening fast and could be, quote, a little bit scary. Gates sees AI, though, as solving big problems from healthcare to agriculture, but admits it will also replace many jobs. But still, he says he's optimistic, and he says he's encouraging young people. This is your fantastic opportunity. Anti-Hamas protests are now entering their third day in once Hamas strongholds in Gaza. Protesters are openly condemning Hamas, chanting, out, out, Hamas, get out, and demanding their removal. One grieving father said, Hamas destroyed us and brought us disaster, while another Gazan declared, we are done. We want a decent life for our children. And hundreds of young people and hungry for God packed out a football stadium in Denham, Louisiana last week to hear the gospel message of Christ at a handful of local churches. With the Eastern Louisiana Baptist Association hosted the Go Tell America Crusade in partnership with evangelist Rick Cage. You can go read about that at cbnnews.com and more of the top stories of the day. Guys, we have to talk about these Bill Gates comments. I think we all know that there's a shift coming with AI, right? That's undeniable. But when you hear the way Gates talks about it and saying things like, we're not going to need teachers anymore and doctors, I'm sorry. We should not be talking about replacing those sorts of jobs. They should only be enhancing those sorts of jobs. You need people to learn from. It's the human condition, and there will be other side effects to removing humans from all of the equations in life, from your education to going to the doctor. He said there, great tutoring. Now, I don't know if he meant for school, but you can imagine that someone like Bill Gates, who's not a Christian, is thinking about things like counseling, right? You're going to get great advice from these AI things. I'm not scared. Obviously, God is sovereign. God is in control. So I'm not scared of AI. It's a little unnerving to see exactly how the dust is going to settle on this new technology. But what is kind of problematic is when we look at how eager we want to replace things that I think you really need humans to be part of. Because if we don't have those human interactions, guys, we're gonna lose. Social media has already destroyed one generation, or upcoming generation, their ability to interact with one another in person. And so if you remove more of those situations away, the human to human contact, I feel like you're just going to see that problem sort of get exponentially bigger.
Well, all right, let's talk about the fact that, yes, the direct interaction is being cut out, but here's the terrifying part about the human interaction that is not being cut out, but that is covert and hidden under the surface. There are people who are programming the AI. There are people who are making decisions about what kind of counseling that would look like, what kind of education that would look like, what kind of healthcare advice that would look like. And whoever controls the AI is controlling very likely what those messages are, what they look like, how they're being communicated. So when we talk about social media and some of the craziness we've seen in the last few years when it comes to bias and some of the media bias we often talk about, what is that going to look like? That's going to be put on steroids when it comes, if this were to come to fruition, to how AI is actually shaping people's experiences in all of these core areas. That's actually terrifying when you think about that sort of covert influence.
Well, I also can't really fathom what would be the cognitive impact that this would have on people over time, right? If I'm going to go to this source, this screen, and I'm going to type in something, a question, start a conversation, whatever it is, and it's going to give me an answer, whether it's something spiritual, something intellectual, whatever. So I think the cognitive impact is going to be really concerning, because we already are not the best critical thinkers, in large part because of what social media has done to us. This like instant gratification. We have a thought, we want an answer immediately, and we don't want to have to think about the answer, right? The simplest answer is the best answer. And I think already people are struggling conversationally with other people to rethink some of the assumptions that we have, or to engage in ideas that are other than what we may come into a conversation having preconceived ideas about. And I think if you introduce AI, and AI is being used as an intellectual tool and as even a counseling tool, and perhaps even as a spiritual tool, can it be useful? Absolutely. There are good things that can come from it. But I think in the long term, it's significantly going to hamper our ability to cognitively engage with people and even ideas.
Yeah. And we think we're smart, which is, if you think about, I saw somebody, I don't know where I saw
Which
it and
is
where
a
I talked
dangerous
about it
thing
now.
to
Yeah.
think we're smart.
No, we really do. And somebody was showing some like old construction from like the, I don't know, 1600s or 1500s, something like that. And it was just incredible. Like the architecture and the preciseness of how they were building these structures without the use of machines and technology and computers and things like that. And I'm like, those people were smart. They actually had to use their brains and figure stuff out. And yes, they didn't have the modern conveniences, but I think a lot of those modern conveniences, like being able to say, ChatGPT, give me 10 great arguments for this point here, and we don't even have to think about it. I think that's made us even dumber as a collective. When you had people pre all of this technology that had to figure these things out, they had to manually do it all and engage their brain and do it. I mean, there's an argument to be made that they were way, way, way smarter than we were as a collective, just because they had to do things like read. That was their entertainment before television in the last 100 years, right? You had to read a book. And, so yeah, it is certainly concerning, especially when I guess the talk I don't like is the replacement talk, right? Because we all know AI is here. It's not going anywhere. But how do we use it? How do we wield it? And sure, some jobs are going to go away, right? I'm not sitting here saying we need the Pony Express to not go away. But you also have to realize that you cannot replace humans. You just cannot. And no matter how much these technologists want to try to propose that and kind of insinuate that, it's just not happening. And if it does, it's going to be bad news for day-to-day life. But we'll continue to keep on this. Obviously, AI is huge topic. So we will keep following it at cbnnews.com, faithwire.com. All right, we are going to head over to the focus story now. And an outspoken mom's fighting back against a Florida school district after her daughter experienced gender confusion, and she's on a mission to help other parents maintain their rights. This is a crazy story. Tell me about it.
Yeah, this story is absolutely wild. It goes back to 2020. For those who don't know, January, Little John and her family, that was when they realized their daughter was struggling with gender identity. It was something they were very aware of. They had gone to the school and basically said, look, we're aware of this. They reached out to the teachers. They didn't want to, according to their rendition of events, they didn't want to justify what their daughter was going through, but they were trying to navigate it. They were working with a counselor. And so they were aware that their daughter was struggling. And initially, January said that they trusted the school and the officials in the Leon County school system. They trusted them. They were volunteers there. So they went to them as sort of partners in this. And she said she had no reason at the time not to trust the schools. And again, she said, I was a volunteer. I was a huge proponent for public schools and teachers, and that she dedicated hundreds of hours to volunteering in the classroom. So when she reached out to that teacher, she assumed that was going to be the start of just, kind of opening up a dialogue. But she says something else entirely happened. They've been in a legal challenge over this now that's gone on for years, and we'll talk a little bit about that after. But within 2 weeks, she said her daughter, who was 13 at the time, got in the car and told her that she had a meeting at the school. So this is 2 weeks after they sent the email, letting the teacher know, and that she was asked what restroom she wanted to use. Now, this was alarming to January because she's like, wait a minute, I reached out about a pronoun. Like, I reached out about my daughter wanting to be called by a different name. And now we're talking about bathroom use and all this. So they reached out to the school because they were very alarmed, and were upset that the parents were not invited in, according to her, to talk about these issues like the bathroom usage and whatnot. And so this really spiraled into a legal battle, essentially, over this, because January claims there was a support plan that was put into practice without, again, her consent. So here now the daughter's meeting with the school without the parents being aware of what exactly is going on. So there's a lot of other details there, but that's sort of the backdrop of this. And it has really led these parents, January in particular, to become one of the foremost voices on this issue of parental rights.
Yeah. And so how is she helping other parents now on this?
Yeah, so she and her attorney, Bernadette Broyles, Bernadette is with the Child and Parental Rights Campaign. She represents Little John in these legal battles against the school district. They've put together a resource, the Church Transgender Response Guide, and it's really this informational handbook to help Christians and churches navigate this issue, since they've been at the center of it, really trying to help people understand what's being taught in schools, how to protect and safeguard kids. Because this is a resource. And we actually have a story on CBN and FaithWire, and we've got a link out to this resource for those parents and pastors to just help them navigate and protect, children in the midst of this. And of course, there's also been, the legal fight. She's not alone. There are other parents across the country fighting these legal battles for their children.
Yeah. Where does that legal battle, where is it at right now?
So it's interesting. Little John, they've lost this battle. Now they've remained again in a battle over the course of a couple of years. And she emphasized to us, by the way, like they didn't want to sue. She's like, we waited, I think it was over a year until they ended up suing the school district. They just felt like they couldn't settle this issue without going to the courts. But a decision was recently upheld by Chief U.S. District Judge Mark Walker. He dismissed the Little John lawsuit. But the court was divided, and this is interesting. And right now, the Little Johns and their attorneys, as far as we know, they are reportedly reviewing options moving forward. They've had 2 losses. It was a 2-1 loss at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So again, a divided court at 2-1. But the panel concluded that the Little Johns failed to meet the shock the conscience standard. And so, there's a whole lot going on there legally. But the point is, right now, we don't know where this will land. Will this case continue? Will they continue to challenge it?
Yeah. And we're going to have to watch and see if the pendulum is finally swinging. I know we've talked about that on this podcast. At some point, culture and people just get fed up, and not just Christians, not just conservatives who are pushing back against this sort of, wokeness, for lack of a better term, because you're seeing more and more people, because of, it's just like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? More and more people talk about these transgender issues and say that they're this and they're that, and they post it on social media, and it's sort of, you get people caught up in this because all of a sudden we have extremely higher percentages of people claiming to be transgender, et cetera. So you just wonder when the rest of culture is like, okay, enough is enough here. Hey, this is just getting ridiculous. And it's no longer about just being nice to someone who might have gender dysphoria or some other sort of mental health issue. And it's gone way beyond that into trying to foist and thrust this onto the rest of the country and normalize it and make everyone okay with it. I mean, maybe we're starting to get at that point here where we're at the point where it shifts back, because it does seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but it does feel, at least to me, like there is less willpower to force these extreme, like letting guys compete against women in sports. It feels like there's less boldness and less of a desire to stand up for that on there. I mean, even seeing like Gavin Newsom, we know that this is for obviously political purposes, probably considering a run in 2028. So he's suddenly backtracked on that issue. But all that to say is, I mean, maybe the pendulum's shifting back.
Yeah, 100%. I think we are seeing some of that. I think this also is a good reminder too for Christians, right? Because there's an opportunity here, I think, to right this ship and to actually talk about this issue, because people are, I think, fed up, right? They're done with the push from the far left, but they need the hope of the gospel, right? We can push back on it, but if you push back on it and you don't explain why it is these things are wrong, we're apt to just fall right back into the same issue in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So I think the ground now is ripe for Christians to come in and say, you're right, I agree with you. This is a problem. This sexuality issue is a major problem. And let me explain to you what you're trying to address. The hole you're trying to fill with sexuality is actually this, and it's your need for a savior.
Yeah, Billy, final thoughts on this, Billy?
Yeah, I do think that we are at a precipice of things changing and moving. There are times that things are so bizarre and crazy, and they're, with the cancel culture and all of that, that even non-Christians realize they're in a deception. And I think that's what happened with the gender issue. It's one of those weird issues that it actually broke through. And what's so interesting to me is that it can be the thing that actually leads people to say, well, if this is wrong, what else is wrong? And where is the truth? And so in a weird, twisted way, it actually could point people back to the gospel if they go deep enough in asking those questions.
Well, let's pray that's the case, as people obviously are questioning. I think you're definitely right on that people look at these blatant lies, and then once their eyes are pulled back and once the veil is kind of pulled back on that, then they, like you said, they're going to explore that. Well, what is truth then? What is really, really true? And as Christians, we know we have ultimate truth claims there that we know stand the test of time. So let's be praying that God continues on the move for that. All right. The rise of anti-Semitism on the left and right. It's happening. More on that coming up in 30 seconds.
Let me tell you, the God's gonna cut you.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem. Crowds welcome Jesus as king. Rebellion is in the air.
Jesus operates outside our jurisdiction.
Rome will descend on us all.
But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of thieves.
The world will never be the same. Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen: Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
All right. Thankful for our friends over at The Chosen again for sponsoring the Quick Start podcast. Really appreciate that. All right. Trey caught up with Raj Nair of CBN for the latest episode of Faith versus Culture. They talked about the heartbreaking rise and concerning rise of anti-Semitism on the right and the left, and the spiritual battle at the root of the issue. That conversation is today's main thing.
Anti-Semitism in the United States is continuing to balloon. The Wall Street Journal this week even said that far-right anti-Semitism is spiking. Where does the issue of anti-Semitism stand across the country right now?
Oh, that's a heartbreaking question, because I always thought, as a student of the Holocaust, I've been to Israel 30 times. I naively thought, oh, well, it'll never come here. And if it comes here, it's those crazy people at Columbia and Harvard that have lost their minds that, are chanting ridiculous things. But it'll never come to like the mainstream, I even hate to use this word, but conservative Christian spheres. But it has. And I think what's studying this at length, what I realize is it's not racism. It's not just, the Jewish people, I'm not a fan. I mean, some people would say that, or it's, they do this, they do that. in my opinion, as someone who's basically dedicated their life to this for the past, decade or so, it's a spiritual thing. There's a demonic force in this world that hates the Jewish people, and I think it's because of Scripture. I first got into the Israel space because of Israel is the one place in the Middle East that women have equal rights and Christians are protected and blah blah blah. But then as I fell in love with the Old Testament, I'm like, wow, I've totally misunderstood the greater plan that God has for the people of Israel. And so to see it exploding on the right with, I don't want to name names, but it's important. Well, I guess I'm going to, but it's important to talk about it. I mean, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, these people that have a lot of other great things to say, have platformed and or said some just abhorrent, obvious lies. I mean, literally, Joseph Goebbels, if you know who that is, he was kind of the propaganda minister of the Nazis of the Third Reich. I mean, verbatim saying some of these things, and I'm just like, I have a hard time believing that we're here again. But and I know we're going to get into this, but I have a Holocaust survivor friend who recently passed away who said, look, guys, the Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers. It didn't start with Zyklon B and Majdanek and Treblinka and Auschwitz. It started with words. It started with the othering of the Jewish people. Then it moved to boycotts. And surprise, surprise, we're there. And so to see it on the left and the right, I guess it shouldn't be shocking because this has been happening for 4,000 years, but it is sad.
How much of this can we chalk up to just the social media sphere that exists now, right? One popular host has this person, so then not even thinking about it, somebody else as well, because they had them. I'm also a huge influencer, so I need to talk to this person about this thing. How much of it is just mindlessly spiraling into bringing these kinds of people and terrible thought leaders into the conversation? And how much of it is that spiritual blindness that you're talking about?
I think everybody wants a scapegoat, right? I think everyone wants to blame someone for the world's problems. And if 9/11 and JFK and, the German collapse in World War I, and if the river turning red, and I mean, the Roman Empire, there's mice, and I mean, it's all, the Jewish people, it's their fault. So I think sometimes it scratches a natural itch to want to have a scapegoat, which ironically, scapegoat is a Jewish practice from the temple days. And so I think you combine that with, and if you don't know the news industry well, you are doing your job, the more people you can get to watch your content and stay on your content. It's kind of sick and twisted. And so the more outlandish, the more ridiculous, the more that you get riled up, you're doing a good job if you get people to watch your stuff. And that's honestly one of the main reasons I love working at CBN is that's not our motto. That's not our goal. We just tell the news and we bring a Christian perspective to it, and the rest happens. But a lot of these faces, they see, oh, this person had this crazy person on. I'm going to platform that person because it'll get me clicks. And the thing is if you don't know the back end of a lot of these things like YouTube, clicks equal money. The more people that watch your content, you get more money. So if you're a YouTuber that has a platform, it's incentivized to be outlandish. And so I think it's the demonic force of anti-Semitism mixed with a whole bunch of crazy social media things at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with that more. And look, there is this burgeoning anti-Semitism on the right for all of the reasons that you just outlined, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the flourishing anti-Semitism that we also see on the political left. So talk about some of these perspectives, the two ends of those poles, and how that's impacting U.S. policy and U.S. perspective on the nation of Israel.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I say everything very carefully because anything can be taken out of context. When it comes to the large portion of progressive left-wing hatred of Israel, which is bled into the Jewish people, it's based on this weird faux colonial idea of what the state of Israel is, which is just void of all historic background. I mean, people say I'm not anti-Israel, or sorry, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-Zionist, which to me is like saying I'm not anti-Dutch, I just don't like people from Holland living in the Netherlands. It's like, what? Like the Zionism is the longing of the Jewish people to be in their homeland that they've been for 4,000 years. I mean, I don't know if you can make an argument that any people is more attached to one plot of land, one city, than the Jewish people are to Jerusalem and to Zion and to Judea and Samaria. And, you know, it's this weird thing where like people's like, well, it's a bunch of Europeans. I'm like, okay, yeah, there were Jews in Europe who emigrated to Israel. But if you go to Israel, over 50% of Israeli Jews are not European. They're from Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia and Iran and Egypt and Turkey. And if you go to Egypt, you're like, wow, there's a lot of brown people here, because that's the nature of Egypt, or nature of Israel. Ethiopian Jews. I mean, it's a kaleidoscope. And I think a lot of the left-wing anti-Israel, not that there aren't valid points to be had, for sure, but a lot of it is based on this like super progressive, woke, anti-colonial, anti-establishment. And because Israel is kind of winning right now, and they're, you know, they're seen as cozy with the United States, it's this like weird, like, you're on my team, so you must be against this team. And it's like, okay, like, I'll give you a perfect example. The idea of queers for Palestine is just the perfect example. Queers for Palestine. Listen, I have a lot of Palestinian friends. A lot of my Palestinian friends can't come on this channel because they're scared for their lives. I'm not kidding. Friends who, like, I would love to talk, but my family lives there or whatever. So it's not anti-Palestinian to point out the fact that in some of these places like Gaza, if you were openly gay, it would not go well with you. And yet the largest, you know, pride parade in the Middle East is in Tel Aviv. And so it's just this like weird, like, what's the word, association, where it's like, okay, well, if you're against this group, I'm against this group. And so Israel has been labeled this thing, which is just fundamentally not accurate. And so I could go on for a long time about the reality of the situation. But I think, again, it stems back from a demonic idea. The left, their view of Israel, to me, is a demonic thing. Like, you can't separate, in my opinion, the obsession with Israel, when literally next door in Syria, maybe, you know, estimates of 1 million people have died since the beginning of the Arab Spring. And it's like, okay, no one cares about that at all. Or in Sudan, or in Yemen, no one cares. But like, there's this saying, it's true, actually: no Jews, no news. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people fall for it.
All right. Appreciate that conversation there for sure. And you can check out the full video on the CBN News YouTube channel. Just go to the Watch Us Live tab under there, and you'll find that episode of Faith versus Culture there. All right. We've got time on the podcast today for one last thing. Going to take a look at Hebrews 12:3. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. And just fixing our eyes on Christ, guys, here's the Savior for humanity getting rejected and brutalized by the people he came to save, and he endured that. So whatever hostilities we're facing, we should be able to face that as well, knowing what he endured for us.
Absolutely. We can draw strength from that, and also peace in the midst of trials.
Yeah, I think that verse reminds us that reminds me that Jesus not only redeems us, but he sustains us in this life.
All right, great spot to leave it there on the Quick Start podcast for this week. As always, make sure you're heading on over to cbnnews.com, faithwire.com. Make them regular stops on your internet journeys when you're scrolling around. You get that news from a Christian perspective, just not getting it really anywhere else. So, Lord willing, and that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back on Monday with more. Have a fantastic weekend. God bless. See you then.